What if technical debt wasn't a problem to fix, but a habit to manage? Technical debt is something we've talked about a lot on this podcast, but in today's episode, I'm going to be joined by the founder and CTO of OmbuLabs. And together, we're going to unpack one of software's most misunderstood concepts. Because my guest will argue that technical debt isn't inherently bad, but it's the interest from neglect that is slowing teams down. And he will explain why, by reframing it as technical health, this can help companies build better habits, and AI will also accelerate remediation when humans remain in the loop, and why non-technical leaders must start listening when engineers raise those red flags. And yet we'll also explore what a healthy balance between velocity and maintainability looks like in this age of AI agents and automated coding tools. And I'm going to attempt to do all that without sneezing or coughing, because you may have noticed I do have a bit of a cold at the moment, so if my voice sounds different, don't worry. The show will go on, and this too shall pass, so have no fear. But before our interview today, a quick shout out to our sponsors. And if you're the person who everyone calls when something breaks, I think you'll appreciate this one. NordLayer gives IT teams total visibility into who's accessing what, where, on which device, and all without the usual complexity. And did you know you can deploy in minutes, enforce access policies, and integrate it with your existing SSO or provisioning tools? And because it's built on zero trust foundations, you'll know that every connection is verified, not assumed safe. And I've spoken to enough IT leaders to know that easy deployment is absolutely everything. And NordLayer really does deliver on that. Consider it a modern cybersecurity that doesn't slow you down or cause you frustrations or lock you into hardware. Simply protect your systems and your sanity. Go to nordlayer.com/techtalksdaily and use the code TechDaily-28 to get 20% off your yearly plan. But now, let's get today's guest on. So, a massive warm welcome to the show. Can you tell everyone listening a little about who you are and what you do?
Yeah. Hey, Neil. Happy to be here. My name is Ernesto Tagwerker, and I'm the founder and CTO of a small agency called OmbuLabs.ai. We do a lot of work with custom machine learning models and technical debt remediation. I'm originally from Argentina, but I've been living in Philadelphia for the past 9 years with my wife and 3 kids.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for sitting down with me today, investing a bit of time with me. I know how precious your time can be. And every day on this tech podcast, I try and demystify or talk about a topic that we hear a lot about, especially if it's a buzzword, for example. And you mentioned a word there, technical debt. And I think that's something that we've all heard repeatedly in our news feeds over the last few years in particular. But one of the things that attracted me to you, and one of the reasons I invited you on to join me, is I read that you said that technical debt is actually one of the most misunderstood concepts in software. So the question I've got to ask to set the scene for our conversation today is, how would you define technical debt here in 2025? And why do you think so many companies still get it wrong?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, when Ward Cunningham came up with this metaphor, he had the best intentions. He was talking about, shipping first-time code, kind of like taking on debt, and, that not always being a bad thing. It can actually help you move faster at the start. And he said, as long as you go back and pay it off later with a proper refactor. I think the real trouble starts when later never comes. Every time you have to work around that messy code, you're basically paying interest. And if you let that pile up for too long, the whole engineering team can grind to a halt under, the weight of technical debt. And I think where companies get it wrong is in the later part of that phrase. They think that later, it's going to be like, okay, 1 sprint a year, or, 1 week of tech debt remediation, and we're going to be much better. But yeah, they just forget to do it. And then it's like, okay, they take on more and more and more technical debt, and then the interests come back to haunt them. I do like the idea of technical health more, kind of relating that to like, our own health, So we all get sick. We all have bad habits. We all have health problems, every now and then. And if we don't change our habits, if you don't take things seriously, then that can cause even bigger problems, as we get old.
And with AI now embedded in almost every development workflow, I'm curious, how do you see the relationship between AI and developer experience and technical debt? How do you see all these things colliding and evolving?
Yeah, AI is a great tool, and I think it's key for us humans, to improve developer experience and to remediate technical debt faster. I think the tricky part is that technical debt and developer experience are partly based on human perception. So I usually recommend engineering teams have open conversations about tech debt and DX. It's important to ask, everybody in the team what's acceptable code quality, what's acceptable technical debt in that feature. Why is our engineering team so frustrated with the developer experience? And then once you answer those questions and you have some sort of alignment across the team, you can start using AI, but it's going to be based on the humans defining what technical debt and good DX mean to them. Because if you just go and start using Claude or VS Code or Copilot and you don't instrument your AI tooling properly, it could negatively impact DX, or it could, make things even worse, increase technical debt faster. So I think there has to be like a connection between humans and AI, and you have to like feed it the right signals for AI to actually help you make your code more maintainable.
And you recently referenced some Google research that perceived technical debt often varies from team to team. So how can leaders get everyone aligned on what counts as real measurable debt? Because if nobody's aligned and everybody's seeing something different, it must be challenging too, right?
Yeah, and that research paper by Google is amazing. They did so many surveys across, hundreds of development teams, and they basically understand that it's important for leaders to understand the concept of technical debt, and that particular concept is relative to teams and applications. Some teams might consider, some dependencies or some parts of the code to have unacceptable technical debt, and other teams might be okay with it. It's not just about teams, but also about like the life cycle of a product. So that this term technical debt is such an umbrella term, and sometimes we just hear it or we say it. And I think leaders should be more inquisitive when engineering teams mention it as, hey, there's too much tech debt, their DX is terrible, and it's impacting our team's velocity. So, or it's impacting security or application performance. So then I think leaders need to dig deeper and ask questions like, how is this technical debt impacting the quality of the product? How could we prioritize our technical debt remediation efforts? And how would we know if we're heading in the right direction? So I feel like surveys can inform leaders better. And then out of that information, we can pick and choose what metrics we want to keep track of and improve over time.
And what role do you think developer experience should play in managing technical debt? And also, how can DX leaders that could be listening, how can they better help their teams to ship faster without compromising quality? Again, quite a balancing act, I would imagine.
Yeah. And I think it's a question of balance, and agile software development. Let's say we have 2-week sprints, right? I think it's about investing 10 to 20% of that time improving DX or remediating technical debt. So I think DX leaders can invite their engineers to participate in like recurring surveys about technical debt and DX. And the results of those surveys, will help you identify metrics and keep track of that metric over time. So, as programmers, we're always eager to implement metrics and implement code solutions to make things better. But there's the human side that cannot be ignored. The combination of metrics and survey results are great to find like bottlenecks in the tooling related to like your development process and to steer the engineering team in the right direction. So I think that's where leaders can make a difference. The best organizations that we worked with invest a few hours per sprint on reducing tech debt and improving DX. It's not a race. It's not like 100-meter dash. It's a marathon. And if you don't invest like a little bit of time every week on making things better, it's just gonna create some sort of toxic environment when it comes to like shipping features and patching bugs in your team.
And of course, 2025 has been all about agentic AI and AI agents. So as AI agents and coding tools continue to promise faster delivery, do they also risk adding new layers of invisible debt if teams don't document and review all their outputs carefully? And one of the reasons I say that is I've seen announcement after announcement this year of these swarms of agents that are going to be unleashed out there. And the ex-IT guy in me gets a little bit cautious, thinking, have the guardrails been put in place here? But what have you seen?
Yeah, well, we actually have an AI agent that's been helping us basically come up with Ruby on Rails upgrade plans for our clients. And it's great. It saves us a lot of time. It basically goes into our client's code base and then it looks for deprecation warnings that need to be addressed before upgrading a Rails application. And these coding tools are great. They will definitely like improve productivity if they're not already doing it for your engineering team. But at the same time, I feel like they have to be monitored and orchestrated by humans. You hear about, MCPs, and every service out there has an MCP server running, which is great. That means like AI agents can consume data from these different services that you're using to ship code to production. But you do have to get the humans to feed the right signals to their AI tooling. And it can certainly generate a lot of code faster without increasing the amount of technical debt. But, I feel like AI agents are only as good as their human operator. If the input is good and the output is thoroughly reviewed, it's a great help. Now, if the input is iffy and the output is not reviewed, and you just trust that it's doing the right thing, then it could turn into a nightmare and it can, increase the amount of technical debt. Now, there's so many tools out there. And even if you don't have a tool that has like an MCP server that you can feed into the agent, you can certainly use like tools that can run locally. Like in Rubyland, you have tools like Reek and Churn and Flog and SimpleCop and Rubacop and all these things like Brakeman that constantly generate data for humans to understand like the risks and like the technical debt in different dimensions. But that can also inform your AI tooling into making the right decisions. When you're telling it to build something for you, it can consider all these different dimensions, security, performance, complexity, and all that, and use it to write software or write code that adapts to the standards that you set for code quality.
Now, many founders that could be listening are often guilty of delaying refactoring code in the name of speed. But of course, they pay the price later, back to technical debt again. So what strategies do you recommend for balancing shipping velocity and, of course, long-term maintainability?
Yeah, and that's a good question because kind of takes us back to the idea of the life cycle of a product or a feature, it makes a lot of sense when you're building an application that has not yet reached like product market fit to maybe not worry so much about code coverage,
Yeah.
At the beginning of a product. I think it's important not to get obsessed with like gold plating and code coverage percentage for your test suite. Like, why would you want 99% code coverage for a feature you don't know it's going to be around for more than a month? But yeah, I think like the big mistake with testing and code coverage is to think that, it's okay to not have tests for that feature because you don't know if it's going to be around. But then once it's validated and users are finding value using it a lot, you can't just leave it at 0%. You have to like gradually make it better, add more coverage, make sure you test edge cases and all that. But I wouldn't also recommend you go from 0 to 100 code coverage in a week. You can gradually increase it every month and take the slow and steady approach so you don't have to like sacrifice the product roadmap, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, going back to the idea of like sprints and, agile environments, I usually recommend teams spend between 10 to 20% of every sprint addressing some form of technical debt, and writing tests can be a way to do that.
And when researching you, I also learned that you've written that culture change is key to managing technical debt, or at least one of the key factors there. So what practical steps could a leader listening to our conversation today, what steps could they take to make this part of their everyday engineering conversation? And maybe we can stop talking about technical debt 5 years from now, but I doubt it. But what steps should they be taking?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think in terms of technical debt, it's important to like identify what metrics are important right now. So it could be, that technical debt is not so much in your code and your code base, but it could be in your dependencies. There are metrics to measure dependency freshness, right? Like lib years, which is a single number telling you how up to date your dependencies are. And once you have identified what metrics you are going to be working on, you can basically track them over time. You can basically take a divide and conquer approach. You don't have to do it all at the same time. Oftentimes, the toxicity in a culture, I believe, comes from non-technical leaders dismissing the advice related to technical debt. This is such a big red flag, which could mean, that the company doesn't value good engineering. And that usually affects another red flag, which is, engineering team turnaround, people that just keep leaving because they feel like they're not being listened to. So I would say that that's something that non-technical leaders can work on. It's just listen to technical leaders who know what they're doing, and they're not just throwing the term technical debt to I don't know, justify being lazy or just being slow. There's something there, and non-technical leaders need to, like I said, maybe start thinking about technical health, better habits for their code base so that they can ship more features faster.
And as we look to the months and years ahead, I'm curious, you sound an optimistic guy. How do you see AI-driven automation reshaping the way that we measure, track, and hopefully eventually eliminate technical debt with within modern software organizations? Do you see AI having a real impact here?
Yeah. Oh, certainly. I think, I think it's also a mistake to think that we need zero technical debt. I think some technical debt is good, especially, if you're building things that you don't know if they're going to be around for long. So that would be like my first point there, to not focus on zero technical debt, and focus more on what's an acceptable level of technical debt. So when we look at AI tooling, if you're properly configuring it to get all the best signals based on your standards. I can see it providing insightful, reviews and pull requests, suggesting changes, proposing changes, just submitting new pull requests out of nowhere, in a way that it doesn't overwhelm the humans reviewing it. I believe humans are going to be very much necessary for any, engineering team like this. AI, there's also a lot of hype in AI, and a lot of non-technical leaders think that they can just use an AI agent to build their product and slowly and gradually make it better. I don't believe that's going to happen. I think humans are always going to be necessary, and the role of software engineers is definitely shifting into, let's think about it as an orchestra director that needs to basically tell the AI agents what to do and what signals to consider to gradually build something and to improve it. So when we look at AI as an agency that does, that lives in the intersection of AI and technical debt remediation, we see AI as a great tool for us to save time doing repetitive work. And, the AI tooling that we came up with for the Rails upgrade roadmap is just the beginning for us. Once we have all these action steps, we can later translate those into small pull requests that are easy to review, test, and QA, and then eventually ship to production. So I think the future is certainly bright when it comes to AI tooling helping us with upgrading dependencies or refactoring code. But at the end of the day, the core of the problem is just feeding it the right data so you get the best results possible and you don't end up making things worse.
And I think one of the big other aspects in ensuring that everything goes to plan here is continuously evolving and adapting. And I think there's a real pressure on us as individuals to be in a state of continuous learning. So I've got to ask, as someone right in the heart of this space, in this fast-changing environment, how do you self-educate? How do you keep up to speed with some of the changes that you see there?
Yeah, that's super interesting, and I think it is a question about introspection, right? What are the medium? How do you learn best, right? I remember back in high school, I took a class that was about, techniques to learn things. What are the things that you do that match your brain, So for me, it's just writing down concepts and connecting them, and then that helps me understand something better. One thing that I've learned is that I read so much for work that I don't want to spend my spare time reading more books to learn more things. So I've gotten into audiobooks a lot. Podcasts like this one are great for me because when I'm driving, from Philly to New York, I can just put on a podcast or listen to an audiobook and learn something new from someone who has a ton of experience on a particular subject. So I would say that is one of my favorite ways to learn things. And another way I would recommend is, for people who are visual like me and like to listen to things, just to go to conferences, RailsConf, RubyConf, Business of Software are conferences that are super interesting. I've learned a lot from, not just from the talks, but from the conversations in the hallway track with other open source maintainers like me.
Fantastic advice there. And for anybody listening wanting to dig a little bit deeper on some of the work that you're doing around this and find out more information about OmbuLabs, where can they find you and your team online? Where can they find more information? Where would you point them?
Yeah, sure. They can visit unpack.ai, or they can find us on Blue Sky. And if you're interested in hearing or reading more about Ruby on Rails and technical debt, you can go to fastruby.io, which is one of our productized services for the Ruby world. And another one that we have is upgradejs.com, which is where we publish a lot of the content for technical debt remediation for JavaScript projects. So yeah, if you want to connect with me on LinkedIn, that's another way. I am always happy to answer questions about this content and to basically talk shop about tech debt and code quality. So yeah, thanks for having me, and I'd love to connect with your audience if they find these topics super interesting.
I'm sure they will. I mean, I will add links to everything to make it easy for them to find you. And I think you raised so many big points today around technical debt. It's something that every company, big and small, worries about. I think it was Gartner that estimated about 40% of infrastructure systems have this problem. But as you pointed out today, contrary to what many believe, this isn't just a coding problem. It's a developer experience problem sometimes as well. And I just cannot thank you enough for coming on here, busting a few myths and talking about some of the solutions as well. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much, Neil. It was great to be here, and thanks for your thoughtful and nice questions.
I think my guest perspective reminds us that great engineering isn't about chasing zero debt. It's actually about building systems and cultures. It's about building systems and cultures that stay healthy over time. And his approach to human-led AI, continuous investment and open communication, for me, this shows that the developer experience and product quality can rise together. And I also loved how he compared technical health to personal health, a mix of small, consistent improvements that prevent bigger breakdowns later. So over to you. It's time for me to ask you, are you managing your technical health? Let me know as always, techtalksnetwork.com, LinkedIn, X, Instagram, just at Neil C. Hughes. But that is it for today. So thank you for listening as always, and I'll speak with you all soon. Bye for now.